Only because we have limited time. I'm used to speaking in bus garages, and actually we kind of are in one. No, we're close to one. Hello, everyone. I'm Charlie Zelli, chair of the Metropolitan Council and chair of this CMC. I welcome our audience and welcome CMC members. Because we have limited time, I want to just kind of get going. People might be coming in while we are meeting. But just a couple of little quick housekeeping reminders. This meeting is being live streamed, so and it's being recorded by the Met Councils. Mics are live, so keep that in mind for any sidebar conversations. If you're interested in any of the handouts or in the materials, those are available on the project website, which is bluelineext, one word, bluelineext.org. And members of the public watching, please feel free to submit comments to Nakango Sigulu until May 19th. They will be posted on the project's website as well. And if you're looking for Nakango's email address, it's on slide 2, so you'll see that here in a second. Please consider the timeliness of this meeting. We need to be out at 3 o'clock for a subsequent meeting, so if we could have our meets and greets and side conversations after the meeting in the lobby, that would be great. Today's important. We're going to be hearing a report on the community-driven anti-displacement work. As we all maybe remember, we had back in August of 2020, we announced the need to find a new route, and that was able to do without sharing land with a Class 1 railroad. And I think in the process of that shift away from the railroad, we discovered, oh my gosh, we're going to be able to provide even greater access and benefits to communities. So we've actually learned a lot. I learned a lot from all of you and constituents and households along the way. Now, at the same time, the change renewed real concerns about displacement. This is not a new concept, but it's one that's been wrestled with large projects across Minnesota and across the country. So we heard that, we share that concern, and so today we're going to hear a series of recommendations from C. Terrence and his work at the University of Minnesota's Center for Urban and Regional Affairs, CURA. And before, we're going to hear from CURA soon, as well as community leaders who have been engaged in the process. And I really have to thank the committee, those that have been involved in the process, not just hours, but days spent really deliberating and considering and providing great thought leadership in this work. So this is really an important moment, one we've totally been looking forward to. There are a lot of things in this project. Most importantly, in this process, particularly over the past year, we have heard from community members. We've heard from voices that we have not heard from in the past, and we've heard differences of opinion. Most important thing for behalf of the project staff, and I know our committees here, is those voices of concern have actually had real effect on our opinions, our decisions, and our plans. So I just want to reiterate that these various ways of getting input have landed not only to be listening, but into the actual actions that we are in the process of taking. So, more on that later, but we really do respect and appreciate everybody's engagement along the way. In June, we're going to really focus on Minneapolis, so stay tuned. June, we will talk about many options for the alignment, particularly choices east of 94, which is important. And I know now we have an opportunity to hear from the public up front. We started this last month. So we've got a protocol for allocating 15 minutes of testimony. I have a list, and we're actually going to start with a Jason Greenberg, who is a committee CDC member, but because of your schedule, we're going to put you part of the public comment, which seems to make sense.
Yeah.
Also, I'm just going to ask everybody, we're allocated up to 3 minutes, but feel free to make it less than that, because if it's 2 minutes, we're going to allow more people to speak. I'll just say it that way. Again, now, if those of you who have signed up and don't get a chance to hear from you, feel free to send comments to Nkongo. Again, his email is right there and on the screen. And also, we'll have an opportunity after our public comment to introduce our, well, in fact, why don't we just do this really quickly now? Let's introduce our CMC members. And I always go to the right and go this way.
Irene Fernando, Chair of the County Board and Commissioner for District 2.
Dan Dorr, Business Advisory Committee from Robbinsdale.
Tara Watson, Business Advisory Committee, Minneapolis, business owner as well.
Jim Adams, Mayor of Crystal.
John Pacheco, Met Council member representing District 6.
Nick Thompson, Metro Transit.
Therese Kaiser, City Council, Crystal.
Meg Forney, President, Minneapolis Park and Recreation Board.
Jason Greenberg, Community Advisory Committee, resident of Robbinsdale.
Jeremiah Ellison, Ward 5, Minneapolis.
Denise Butler, ACER, African Career Education and Resource, Inc., Blue Line Coalition member.
Carla Arredondo Payan, Blue Line Coalition member and newly joined CMC.
Yay.
Welcome.
Oh, from Pueblos de Lucha and Esperanza.
Robert Lilligren, Met Council, District 7.
Reva Chambliss, Metropolitan Council Vice Chair and District 2.
Well, thanks. Welcome, everyone. And if you're thinking I delayed that so that everybody could sit down, you'd be right. Jason.
Yes.
Start us off.
So I apologize that I have schedule conflicts. So I know that this would be better in context after the presentations, but just wanted to make sure we had an interesting discussion last night in the CAC, and I wanted to share some of those comments. So we'll all be hearing the presentation from the Anti-Displacement Work Group and all of the things that they did. So we definitely thank them for all of their effort and work. But some of the questions that came up around the CAC discussion was around when we look at the outcomes, the projected outcomes. There's a lot of talk of ensuring things as an outcome, and there were a lot of questions on how do we make that, how do we enforce and making sure that what they're projecting is actually what happens and that we do ensure. So what are the criteria to ensure that? We talked a lot about getting the word out to the community. So there's parts of it about work and jobs and creating jobs within the corridor. And how do we get that information out to the community? How do we ensure, again, that that the recommendations actually include members of the Minneapolis community in the corridor? So that was a big piece. There were questions around funding, which again will be addressed as part of this presentation, but there was a good discussion about funding and how that's going to happen and all the different places that came from. We did have time at the end that was kind of adjacent to this conversation, but did involve the displacement piece, which is we have some newer members on the CAC, and there is a lot of concern about displacement in the North Minneapolis community. And they were really, that was expressed as far as they're not feeling like they're getting information quickly enough, that, are they going to be displaced? And some of these questions we don't have answers to yet, and I think that that's something to understand, but the community is really feeling that they're not getting the information that they need to know exactly what's going to happen. Some of that is just the process of this project. But I think there is it was communicated that there are people that do not want to be displaced, that do not want this project, that feel like no matter how much anti-displacement happens, that it's going to impact their community adversely. And so just making sure that we're cognizant of that community is there as much as we are doing communication, and that there are things that the community has expressed that have led to direct changes within this project, that there are still a lot of people out there that are not familiar with what's happening with this project. And as they learn more, and I guess that was the one other piece, is that when we looked at it early on of, okay, these are these changes, and it's in a general high level view, it might be okay. But as we're getting further into the details, and specifically one of the parts of the conversation that came up was Washington and Broadway and 21st. That's not just going down West Broadway, and that's going to impact a separate community that at one point maybe was okay with the idea of West Broadway, but as more details come up, that they're feeling that they're not as supportive of the project. So just making sure that everyone's aware of that. That is what we're hearing in the CAC. That's the voice of the community that's coming back through our group. And I just wanted to make sure that that's expressed. I know it can be sometimes a difficult conversation, but I just want to make sure that this group hears that, and that is what we spent a lot of time talking about that last night. So I appreciate you letting me speak. Thank you, Chair Zelli, and I have to go. So
Thank you.
Thank you.
Jason.
Yeah.
Appreciate your comments.
Yep.
Okay, now we're going to hear from other members of the public. Kathy Netsky, are you here? Kathy, welcome.
Thank you, Chair.
Sure.
Thank you, Council. I'm Kathy Nitsky, a resident of Lynn Park. And I'll make it real brief. I'm prepared, but I'll make it even briefer so that more people can speak. One of the things I ask all of the council here, as you're listening, and the audience and us community members, is that we all have a superpower, and that's to be an authentic human being. And we need to consider that, all of us. And we have a power to be free, I believe. And I'm so proud of our community for realizing that power. As I didn't get the document that was Anti-Displacement for Dummies. Is there a copy? I looked at it last night, and I gleaned some things to share, just some words, and then I'll be done. It says under outcomes by jurisdiction, I think that was page 34 for all of you that are following along. And I got excited and joyful for some of these words that were used. I don't quite get the whole document, but I'm here today to listen and see what is going to be happening and transpiring with this document. I think it was 34, might have been 32 or 33, I skimmed a few. Provides opportunities for community to connect and develop in a, everyone say that word, is anyone with me? Joyful way. That's written in there, in my copy anyway. Maybe mine was edited. Creating opportunities for community ownership and being able to measure levels of community ownership. They didn't describe what community ownership really means. We'll find out. Control over decision-making throughout the entire corridor. And, okay, there was something about the youth, ensuring that youth feel safe on and around the light rail and feel excited and proud to remain. So I hold these words, or we'll hear more about these words. Thank you.
Thank you for your testimony. Now we'll hear from Mitchell Hansen.
Hello.
Welcome.
Thank you. Appreciate it. I'm Mitchell Hansen, the Harrison Neighborhood Association. The Cura Anti-Displacement Work Group report confirms what HNA and Harrison residents have been saying for nearly a decade, that the former route harmed our community. From the report, neighborhoods like Harrison and North Minneapolis have experienced rising property values and speculative land ownership. This experience was confirmed by data presented in the workshop. The Anti-Displacement Work Group communicated the importance of ensuring that the recommendations from this group address impacts from the previous Blue Line Extension route in neighborhoods like Harrison. Blue Line Extension corridor communities continue to reiterate that repairing past harms of the Blue Line Extension project is as important as addressing future harms to ensure that current residents are the primary beneficiaries of this project. As one of the desired outcomes, the report elevates the need to grant reparations to the Harrison neighborhood for the harm caused by the previous iteration of the alignment. So, what do reparations for Harrison look like? In 2020, H&A began a community-led process that asked residents what they thought was needed to make Harrison whole for the harm caused by the former route. In addition to the policy recommendations outlined in CURE's report, Harrison community members have brought forward the following demands: removal of Olson Highway and the implementation of our Phase 2 community vision for restored 6th Avenue North. $1 million investment in H&A's home improvement grant program to assist low-income homeowners in maintaining the habitability of their homes. $1 million investment in H&A's down payment assistance fund to assist residents in achieving homeownership. A $1 million investment in Harrison Rental Assistance Fund. Implementation of the infrastructure improvements outlined in the Van Wyck and Penn Avenue Station area plans, which include sidewalk improvements, the construction of a community pavilion and picnic area at Van Wyck Park, new heated bus shelters, and lighting improvements throughout the neighborhood. A moratorium on the sale of Harrison's 4 city-owned garden lots to ensure continued community access to fresh and healthy produce. A commitment of 300 project-based public housing vouchers to be applied to new housing development projects within the Harrison neighborhood, ensuring units are affordable to residents at or below 30% of area median income. A commitment on the part of the Met Council to abandon its plans to construct a sewer lift station at 260 Fremont Avenue North and instead relocate it to another site within the neighborhood that's not along the Harrison's only commercial corridor. A commitment on the part of the Met Council to work with H&A and Harrison community stakeholders to develop a community-serving grocery store at 260 Fremont Avenue North. Tax forgiveness or tax waiver for low-income Harrison homeowners who cannot afford their increased property taxes, and special assessments to assist them in avoiding tax forfeiture of their homes and the loss of generational wealth opportunities. We ask that the Met Council, Hennepin County, and the City of Minneapolis implement the policy recommendation outlined in the CURE report and grant the reparations that H&A and Harrison community members are requesting so that Harrison can finally be made whole. Thank you.
Thank you. Your comments. And now hear from Alex Burns. Welcome, Alex.
Hello, my name is Alex Burns. I am the Advocacy and Policy Manager at R Streets Minneapolis. I'm here today, first for some brief background. R Streets Minneapolis is a grassroots advocacy organization, and we work to put people first in transportation decision-making. So projects like the Blue Line extension and other transit, walking, biking, rolling infrastructure projects are projects that we're generally very supportive of. But when we're doing this work, we talk with people every day at their doors and at their businesses and at their transit stops about the transportation projects that are in their community. And without exception, almost, when people learn about the possibility of a redesigned street or a new bikeway or a new transit project, the first thing that they respond with and the biggest concern that they have is the impact of the project on displacement, gentrification, and the affordability of their community. And the Blue Line extension is an important opportunity, and it's an important opportunity to improve mobility for working class people, for creating economic opportunity, reducing pollution, improving health outcomes, and creating abundance in neighborhoods that have long been marginalized and underinvested. However, it is unacceptable for any project to move forward without first funding and implementing policies to ensure that this project does not continue a long history of transportation projects that have caused displacement, division, and divestment in communities of color. And so that's why R Streets Minneapolis stands alongside other members of the Blue Line Coalition in calling on you to fully adopt the working group's recommendations and to create a fund to implement the policies and programs. And the last thing I just want to emphasize is that while this is a really strong framework, one thing that is really important that the report makes clear is that this work cannot be delayed and needs to occur at the speed and urgency that the project is progressing. And to quote the report itself, it says that, quote, "the majority of anti-displacement policies need to be implemented prior to construction." And so that is the task that is now your responsibility, Hennepin County, the Met Council, other project partners. That needs to be done to give people peace of mind that this transportation investment is not going to price them out of their community. Thank you.
Hear from Ava Young.
Hi, thank you. I'm Eva Young. I live at 1308 Boardwalk Avenue, and thank you for taking public comment. First of all, I want to say I'd like to urge you to take into account that at this point, a lot of people are really concerned about, especially about riding the trains, that it's not safe. I have heard this from a number of people. I haven't personally experienced feeling unsafe. I have experienced a strong smell of nicotine on the Hiawatha line coming back from the airport. That also, for spending an hour on that is also something I would prefer not to be dealing with. And what I'm trying to say by this is that I think there is, before trying to do a new line, I think that the existing issue with public safety on the current trains needs to be dealt with. I think in the past, it used to be the conventional wisdom is people didn't want to ride buses. Hey, who in their right mind want to ride a bus? But the trains, they're really, a nice thing to. I think that's reversed now. I think I have a friend in St. Paul. She does not have a car, so she's totally transit dependent. And she does not use the LRT. She just uses buses. So I just want, the other thing I want to say about the Lyndale alignment is that in my opinion, that should be taken off the table. And if you want something on Lyndale, I would suggest bus rapid transit. It would solve a lot of the problems. And it would also solve some of the problems with West Broadway, which I understand you've received significant comments about West Broadway also. Third, I just wanted to mention something that was curious at the NAACP meeting we had discussing the Blue Line. There was Terry Austin from Neon attended that meeting, and in the spokesman recorder article about that, the spokesman, Trevor, I can't remember his last name, said that Terry Austin was there representing the Met Council. Well, that was news to all of us there. And I would like to get that clarified on the record, if he was or what. But why would the spokesman for the Met Council tell a media outlet that?
Thank you. Now the person is signed up as Candy.
Oh yeah, that's me. Sorry about that. I forgot
Not at
my
all.
last name. Hi. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Candy Bacon. I am with MICA, which is the Metropolitan Interface Council on Affordable Housing. Do I just look cute doing this? Sorry. Anyways, today I am speaking. Of course, I've been with this project since like 2003. When I was living in Heritage Park, the Corridors of Opportunity, I was on the board and we were excited, but we didn't want it to turn. We wanted to go straight out Plymouth. And that would be the Candy Bacon line. Jeremiah, by the way, that goes straight out to Plymouth. But there's concerns and misinformation and a lot of gunk that needs to be addressed with this project. And I was very excited for the anti-displacement, and I was on the working group, and and we heard from past alignments, the Green Line, what they did with the Cura, and we heard where other states have done. And I was also a part of a group that went to Seattle, and we got to look at their line and how they organized and had the project up and running. Because with the Blue Line extension project going in North Minneapolis, my very concern is like, I did not want it to go through us. I want to make sure that it has stationary stops where it has access to people. It has access to a lot of, I would say, positive things. I'm looking at the Blue Line as positive. But the concern is we don't want anybody displaced. We don't want anybody to lose their home. We don't want any more homelessness. By the way, that's what MICA does, is help to prevent homelessness. So we want to make sure this is a positive line that everyone can enjoy. And we have to look to the future, because right now I'm car dependent. In about 10 more years, I'm not going to be, and I want to have access to a train, to light rail. Like the young lady said, it has to be safe because I don't want to go to jail from federal cops for beating somebody with my cane. So that's what I want to make. And also, Micah knows if we're not excited about fighting, explicit about fighting gentrification, it will happen. And we don't want that, but we want more people to come to the community. We want it to be enjoyable. We want it to be happy. I'm always the one about the party train. That's me. Thank you.
Thank you, Candy. And one more speaker, Cynthia Wilson.
All right.
All right.
Let's go.
Good afternoon, Council. Thank you for having me. Cynthia Wilson, Minneapolis NAACP President. I guess I'm here with just a lot of questions. I feel like this particular project, even though in the midst of all of its information, there's a lot of information that's been veiled. And I don't know if that's done on purpose or not, but what it feels like to me is another form of Rondo. What was told to the Rondo residents in terms of what was going to happen with 94, and then ultimately just doing it and displacing folks everywhere. So when you come and you present this project that's been on the docket for years, and then me as a resident of Lynn Park didn't get all of these different so-called flyers that were indoors and that whole thing. I actually happened to be told about this through someone else. But to understand exactly what's happening is disheartening, is disrespectful. And then to attend these small charrettes and the CACs that were provided and not be able to voice our opinions openly, because somebody else might have the same experience, but you have to go to an individual and tell that individual your story or tell them what's going on. That's not acceptable. There are people who may not even be able to read. There may be people who may not clearly understand the concepts. So to have this, the way it was set up, I found to be very dysfunctional. And so whenever I attended, I made sure my voice was heard. I vocalized questions openly so that people could hear what I was addressing and also noticing. The other thing that's troubling to me, that here is Lynn Park in between Broadway and Lindale, majority Black residents who have built these homes from the ground and or have retained them through generational wealth, right? And so when you're talking about displacement, these people are providing generational wealth for their families the best way they know how. And it appears that every time Black folks monopolize an area or development or create something for their families, here comes these organizations or these departments saying we're going to do this. Systems, you're absolutely right. So it's our jobs to knock down every system of each door one by one. And so I just want to say we're for the light rail, but just not in our area. And we don't think people should come and dictate to us, as they've done in the past, what is and is not going to happen without it being open enough for people to give their information, ask questions. And if they say that they don't want it, you don't force feed it to us, especially people who have paid money for their properties. So I say that with the intent that you will listen. And if you don't, we know what we have to do to make you listen. okay? We will not be a Rondo number 2.
But this one, I really want to thank those that have made public comments, and you have a receptive audience. And now we'll get back to our agenda for our business meeting, which is calling the meeting to order. And the first item being to approve the minutes from April 13th. That summary should have been in your packet and sent out in advance. Are there any edits, corrections? And if not, I would entertain a motion and a second for approval.
Motion to approve.
Second.
Thank you, thank you. Any more comments? If not, all those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? Those minutes have been approved, and the summary will be posted on the website. Now, for the main event is our presentation, overview, recommendations from the Anti-Displacement Work Group and Kira. So I know we're going to have Kathy Gold from Hennepin County and C. Terrence Anderson from Kira to give a presentation and maybe commence a focused discussion. Welcome.
Thank you, Chair. Members of the committee, I'm Kathy Gold, and
I'm C. Terrence Anderson.
we have some guests today that are actually work group members, and they will be coming up and seated at the table at later on in our presentation. We have Miss Amanda Zahn, Mr. Terry Austin, and Mr. Ricardo Perez. Thank you all for coming today. Really appreciate it. So the Blue Line extension will serve areas that have experienced historic disinvestment. Through the historical redlining and racial covenants, you can see the Blue Line extension pathway through the map, and the areas of red that are demonstrated on each side. And so the last thing this project wants to do is create the patterns that did in the past. And so I ground us in that work and why we are here today, putting in this ground work that we've worked very hard with community members to establish, and that is to provide you with some recommendations to mitigate displacement. So when we pivoted in 2020, summer 2020, to reroute the Blue Line extension, we heard very clearly from our community residents and businesses their concerns of displacement. And so we then entered into a procurement process and contracted with CURA, Center for Urban and Regional Affairs at the University of Minnesota, to help lead this, to facilitate this work. As we as government don't always, this isn't a practice that we've had formalized. And so we're really trying to incorporate this work within the project and outside of the project as it sees its pathway or courseway through to actually implement these recommendations. And the goals are to make sure that the current corridor residents and businesses are going to benefit from this light rail investment, and putting these anti-displacement outcomes and recommendations into place, I think is the first step in effort to do that. And we want to make sure that we are preparing our community and we're going to have things in place for them to survive the construction elements and then thrive into the future. And the prepare, survive, and thrive wording there is from our Mr. Ricardo Perez.
Oh, hey, awesome, thank you. By the way, I think your phone is ringing in your purse. Sorry, I just want to let you know.
Thank you.
Yes. Yeah, no worries. Hello. I used to sit here, but now my peers have, they're here. So we're here. So also special shout out to Juxta. They help us make signs that we brought with us today, and they're really beautiful. And they're really doing really cool work. So thank you all for coming. It's so good to see you. So yeah, my name is Ricardo Perez. I use he, him pronouns. I am a coalition organizer with the Alliance and help staff Blue Line Coalition. And as you know, Blue Line Coalition is a team of 12 active orgs. And we also have friends that are not partners yet, but they're coming to our meetings. And we meet monthly to talk about the Blue Line Extension Project and anti-displacement. I feel really proud that even though the project went through some stagnation, we continue to meet monthly. And that collective awareness and memory that we have goes all the way back to 2013 and even further back with people like Candy and Lashella, who couldn't make it today, I believe. So when I first started, like 4 years ago, I found a video where someone, Marika Peppercorn, was saying to the camera that for Blue Line Coalition, it's not about the train, but it's about the people. And I really wanted to make sure that I understood what that meant. And I didn't want to just take it and run with it. So as I've been going to all these meetings in public with you all, like out in community, meeting with Blue Line, I really started discovering what that really meant. And what I found is that it's not about the train, it's about the people. It was about love, you know? People love their communities. They love their neighbors. They love their businesses. And that love that people feel, they make them feel proud about who they are and where they live. And for me, that really was a call to action to ensure that our work wasn't just superficial, but we actually truly discover and work towards making it about people and not the train. So when this anti-displacement work started kind of like move forward, it's so hard to try and build on top of something that's anti, you know, like anti-displacement is the absence of displacement, but what fills that void, you know, that displacement will leave. And for us, what we have discovered is that the opposite of displacement is not anti-displacement, but the opposite of displacement is abundance. Abundance of opinions, abundance of time, abundance of resources, abundance of opportunities, abundance of route options, all sorts of abundance. If we do not know, if you cannot help us understand how we can tap into that abundance, it is not possible for us to give our consent as community for you to build this train through our communities. However, we do believe that there are opportunities for us to make it about the people, for you all to prioritize the needs that you're hearing out there, to secure federal funding, state funding, local funding, Met-Council funding, all sorts of funding for us to truly be able to break patterns and not let this transit development project hurts us. We don't want to survive. We want to thrive as a result of what's happening. So help us prepare to thrive. Don't help us prepare to survive. We don't want to survive anymore. The only reason why we would want this is to break patterns and make it an opportunity for us to thrive. So there's some recommendations in the report that we really want you to start taking action on. We need you to start mobilizing your internal working groups to study these policies, to study these funding pieces, so we don't have to wait until construction or until we show up to, you know, don't wait for that. Like, show us that you're serious when we're talking about anti-displacement. Create the fund now. Adopt policies now. There's some policies that don't cost any money, but have huge human impact. So that's what I wanted to share today. So thank you. Awesome.
So let's get into it. So C. Terrence is here to review a little bit about how we came up with, or we, the work group, came up with the outcomes and the policies recommended for achieving those outcomes.
Thank you. Chair, I'll go back to the last slide just for a second, just to spend a little time contextualizing what we're about to get into. Chair Zelli, committee members, it's really great to be here today. Clearly, it's a very exciting day that I think is reflective of, I think as folks have said, a decade of work. And, you know, we spent the last 20 months, of course, getting to a definitive place about where the recommendations to live into abundance or anti-displacement around this Blue Line project, and I feel pretty excited to do this. Hopefully you've got a chance to read the report. If you haven't, yes, it was 200 pages, and I'm not surprised if you haven't read all of it. I'll do my best to sort of get to the point, which is the recommendations themselves. At least that's what was advised for this presentation. But I also want to let you know we could have written 2,000 pages, and by that I mean please ask all the questions because there's way more nuance to our process and about anti-displacement than what we can even write. But of course, we tried to give you the core findings from the process, as well as a good understanding of where the recommendations were purported to end up. And I feel very proud about this work. I'm thankful to each of the Anti-Displacement Working Group members who are part of this process. Hopefully this ends up as an exciting day for y'all as well too. With that context, let's dive in. So the report, of course, goes through the process. It goes through the research itself. I'm sure in your questions I can sort of help give clarification to what we found in the research as well too. But the report ends with the recommendations, like what can we do about displacement? One of the important things about our process wasn't that we started the question with, is there displacement? Would there possibly be displacement? I think the working group met with the understanding that yes, displacement has occurred in previous light rail projects. It would potentially occur with the implementation of the Blue Line extension. But the question really was, how does it manifest? How is it unique to this corridor? How can we uniquely respond to the characteristics of what's going on in this corridor? That comes to a point with our recommendations that first start with outcomes. And I really hope when folks read the report, they really start with the outcomes themselves in terms of the recommendations, because the outcomes are what we hope anti-displacement achieves at the end of the day, or ultimately what abundance looks like in this community as a result of light rail being constructed in this corridor. My first hope, I think if we can agree with the outcomes, then of course there's a lot of possibilities on how we get there. The report does center 17 distinct policies that support getting to those outcomes. Over the course of our process, we looked at, I think, about 55 different distinct policies. But these 17 sort of rose to the top for a number of reasons. One, of course, the research supporting that they will do what they say they will do. Two, that it fits the community's needs and ultimately what they require for them to sort of live in abundance in this project. But as well as we had large conversations with the governments themselves, each of the different governments that are at this table today, of course, including the Park Board as well, to sort of figure out, do they fit the legal context? Do they fit the resource context or possibilities? Is there the expertise? Can they be achieved in a very practical manner as well too, right? All of those things sort of swirled together in both getting to the outcomes, but as well as the 17 policies that are in this document. Of course, there's 55, I don't know what 55 minus 17 is. I can't do that math off my head super quickly. But there's that many more options at least and what we could really be talking about. And the report talks about that as well. Further, there's really these principles, which I really think about as values, about how we can interpret these policies at their highest point, right? Each of these policies have many different manifestations, right? So there are better policies and worse policies, but really the values help guide the implementation or getting to these outcomes in a way that, I think as Ricardo said, not just surviving, but living in abundance from this process. So I'm gonna walk through each of those three things in the context of this presentation today. So first, the principles for all recommendations. Again, these I sort of interpret as the values, as our guiding post of doing this work or anti-displacement work. Start with being accessible to all. I think while that may seem somewhat self-evident, I think there's a lot of detail and depth to this point. For example, while we may have some anti-displacement policies that are already in effect, it doesn't necessarily mean that they're doing all that they can do. One, maybe not all policies are available to folks or resources are available to folks who are undocumented just as much as folks are documented, but these anti-displacement policies should. And while resources currently exist, I think we know that some organizations have the capacity to get those resources, and right, they're really good about coming to get them, but other folks don't, right? And so accessible to all also means changing the way that we approach and deliver and implement these resources to ensure that it gets to the every small crevice of this community to ensure that they get the appropriate resources that they get to, right? Accessibility to all isn't just stating in policy that you want folks to access it, but it's also the approach that you use to get there. Measurable with accountability mechanisms. You can hear in the room today, and I think in the conversation surrounding this project, of course, there's a lot of distrust in this community, whether there's the belief that one, that these anti-displacement measures will actually be taken, or whether they'll be interpreted at their highest value in their implementation. And so part of that is not just doing it, but it's also having accountability mechanisms over time. I think at the end of the day, one of the key things that I hear all the time in community, we can say all the things that we want, but the actions really are going to show where you are really moving. And so those accountability mechanisms are distinctly important in moving forward as well too. And the last 2 points I think really work together. Designing to support those who are most impacted by construction and targeting existing residents, not potential ones. Of course, we know our region is growing. Of course, there will be new folks who move into this corridor. But the point is that the existing residents should be the primary beneficiaries of the light rail project and of anti-displacement work as a whole. And so we need to design these policies not for a future population, but an existing population that's here today. But of course, knowing that to support these organizations impacted by construction, where we see a significant effects of anti-displacement or of displacement, we need to make sure that we have the necessary supports there too. I think a great part of our process, I think it was referenced earlier, we engaged previous leaders who did anti-displacement type work on, say, the Green Line or Central Corridor Green Line between downtown Minneapolis and downtown St. Paul, or the Hiawatha Line, the existing Blue Line as well today, to say, what can we learn from those past projects about how we can do that work that we've even done before better to make sure that it is getting to the intended effects. So thinking about these as values, right? I think these are the way that we can interpret any of the policies or the outcomes, I think, at their highest view to get their maximum effectiveness, right? Really living in an abundance over the long haul. So let's jump into the outcomes. We did the report breaks them down both as a whole and then into each jurisdiction. So Brooklyn Park, Crystal and Robbinsdale, as well as Minneapolis. We did have membership from around each of the different cities or each of the different jurisdictions that are part of this group. We gave them time to really split into those groups and be able to talk about what their communities needed for themselves, right? Displacement will manifest itself differently in Minneapolis as it will in Crystal and Robbinsdale, and of course that will be different in Brooklyn Park as well too. And so the recommendations really think through the cities themselves and how we need to approach it uniquely to those contexts. So beginning with Brooklyn Park, I believe, the recommended outcomes, again, as a reminder, should be the summation of our anti-displacement approach. What are we trying to get to at the end of the day doing this work in Brooklyn Park? First, keeping the rich culture of the corridor in place. Brooklyn Park, of course, is a quite diverse community, right? It's got a lot of folks from all parts of the world. And I think part of this is not just trying to get to a uniform good in the future, right? And sometimes our anti-displacement approach or sort of a development works towards that end. But I think we have the opportunity to do that differently, right? We know development will happen. The question is, who's that development for? Which culture is it uplifting? Whose vision is it uplifting? At the end of the day, where are we trying to get to? Improving the climate for businesses post-construction and prioritizing the development of spaces for small business. So thinking through just not developing for any businesses, but thinking about the businesses who are most at risk of displacement as a result of light rail construction or operation or the displacement pressures that exist over the long haul. And so part of that is prioritizing development of spaces for small businesses. You might see around the Twin Cities in general, right? We see new development, and sometimes that's for 20,000 square foot spaces for businesses to come in. Maybe they're targeting regional chains to come in or something like that. But really where we're seeing a lot of success for local businesses are smaller footprint spaces that are more affordable and easier to build out for, say, new or immigrant businesses in particular, right? And so we're thinking through this development. It's like, okay, development may be desired, but exactly who's that development meant to prioritize and get in there. Providing opportunities for existing residents and businesses to stay in place and feel supported. So we know, of course, from Green Line construction or Central Corridor construction between downtown Minneapolis and St. Paul, that there was a lot of pressure on small businesses to move, right? And if you think about that, right, there's heavy infrastructure development occurring, especially during construction. Folks may not want to travel to those places to utilize those businesses, perhaps in the same way that they did before. So we need to find a core way to support those businesses during construction when they might be losing receipts due to the sort of the nuisance effect of construction in and of itself. So, but not just allowing them to stay in place, but feeling the support over a longer period of time, both before and after construction as well too. Supporting development, preservation, and access of safe and affordable housing and housing choice. So of course, this is a point we talk about a lot of the time, but of course, development will occur, but is it developing for the existing population? For example, a lot of new housing is for those with 60% area median income or below, while there's a high population of folks who are 30% AMI and below in this particular corridor. So how do we really get to the depth of existing residents, making sure that they have the housing that they need? But I think there's also a really important point about preservation. Throughout this whole corridor is one of the very important bastions of naturally occurring affordable housing in the whole Twin Cities region. And finding a way to protect that NOAA housing is distinctly important as well too. So right, not just building new affordable housing, but preserving that affordable housing stock that we already have today, and thinking through what does safety look like as well too. Of course, that's a conversation that's already shown up in the room, but that's a point that came out of this conversation as well. Through our work with Juxtaposition Arts, who specifically engaged youth and folks experiencing houselessness, the number one point that the youth came up with was making sure that they feel safe on and around light rail and feeling excited and proud to remain in their communities. We can, of course, these are our future folks, not that they just live here now, but we want them to live here in the future, right? And use this line in its intended purpose. Just because it exists doesn't necessarily make it mean that it's the right thing for them to use. So thinking through that population distinctly, as I think, is an important point as well too. Going to Crystal and Robbinsdale, addressing indirect construction impacts. So of course the project will take a large responsibility for construction impacts that are direct to the project. But part of this, I think, connects to the second point, which is improving the climate for businesses post-construction. So it's not just taking only responsibility for what the line has to take responsibility for, but thinking through the overall network connections to the light rail as a whole, and ensuring that that environment is better post-construction than it is currently today. I'm sure we've all been in parts of throughout this corridor where it's like, I wish this was better. And thinking through taking the responsibility for that over the construction of this project. And again, similar to Brooklyn Park, prioritizing the development of spaces for small businesses. Improving the infrastructure around the project, that connects to the last point I just made. Supporting the development, preservation, and access of safe and affordable housing and housing choice. Similar to the last point that I made at Brooklyn Park, keeping the rich culture of the corridor in place. And another point that was distinct to Robbinsdale and Crystal, in particular, was ensuring that there are sufficient resources to support policy implementation, organizing efforts, and community development and ownership, and other anti-displacement strategies. One of the things that we really heard from Crystal and Robbinsdale in particular was, while there was a high support for a number of anti-displacement policies, there isn't necessarily the staff or the resources to actually deliver them if left to their own devices. For example, both were sort of named. They're sort of maxing out their property tax increases that they can make, and or the ability to hire more staff. And so there's really going to need to be another entity that both helps capacitate these governments in order to implement the full vision that even they support. Maybe some of these things aren't implemented by Robbinsdale and Crystal, but sometimes they're better served implemented at the state level. I'll sort of talk about in a little bit later. One of the core recommendations from this process is having a 2024 anti-displacement agenda that goes to the state legislature in the next session next year. So that's Robbinsdale and Crystal, the distinct outcomes we're trying to get to with an anti-displacement report there. And now for Minneapolis, which has, of course, the most recommended outcomes to get to. Providing opportunities for community to connect to BLRT and development in a joyful way. Of course, we hear a lot about the angst that this project provides and the angst that folks are going to feel in the long term. Of course, it's not enough just to deliver the project, but to deliver in one that adds to the cultural capacity, cultural joy of Minneapolis residents, right? And I think Candy Bacon is always brilliant about bringing this point into the room. So thinking not just about business and residential displacement, but also thinking about cultural displacement as well too, right? And I think there's a lot of different strategies about how we get there. Creating opportunities for community ownership and being able to measure levels of community ownership connects to the next point, empowering community to have control over decision-making throughout the corridor. One of the really high values that came from the anti-displacement working group was, of course, the number one thing that delivers agency to folks in Minneapolis is them having control over the property in question, right? And there's a lot of efforts already underway in Minneapolis, say the Community Lakes Commercial Land Trust and otherwise, and City of Lakes Land Trust, but also other strategies and structure that allow higher levels of decision-making to be centered in a community process is a really, really high value that comes from the Minneapolis portion of our work group. Providing opportunities for existing residents and businesses to stay in place and feel supported. granting reparations to the Harrison neighborhood for the harm caused by previous iteration of the alignment. So this connecting to the point, this is the second iteration of this light rail line. One of the core things that our research delivered in our process was displacement pressures are happening earlier and earlier with each new light rail line. For example, in the original Hiawatha line, the existing blue line, really displacement pressure started once the line was completed, right? And basically developers and others were saying, okay, the line's completed, I can now really develop my plan for what I want to do. With Central Corridor between downtown Minneapolis and light rail, it started with the full funding grant agreement, right? So, and then with Southwest Light Rail, it started the Blue Line extension, it started with the announcement of the alignments themselves. So basically, developers are getting more, money is becoming more aligned and gives more confidence with each new project. Okay, you're announcing it, you're gonna do it, so we can really start doing what we wanna do. So this being the second iteration of light rail Blue Line, that started to happen in Harrison, both because, of course, Southwest Light Rail, but also the Blue Line extension at the time aligned at Olson Memorial. So saw some of the highest property values growth in the city, as well as some of the highest rent growth in the city post that alignment decision some years ago. So Harrison already has felt the displacement conversation, which I think in some reason makes the conversation very real for other North Minneapolis residents as well too. And it's not necessarily a legal responsibility, I think, for the project to sort of take this anti-displacement frame within the context of Harrison, but thinking that the responsibility of Blue Line anti-displacement shouldn't forget previous iterations of light rail and how it impacted different communities. So going to Harrison and thinking about Harrison is just as important to think about an anti-displacement as the existing corridor today. Further for Minneapolis, creating and enforcing structures of accountability for government agencies along the alignment. In a conversation last night with the CAC, sort of the metaphor that I used was community feels very confident that the Hennepin County, the Met Council and others are going to build this line because there's a structure that says so, right? There's a staff, there's funding to do it, right? So there's a real belief that you can deliver this project. But today, there isn't that structure to deliver anti-displacement in the same way. So developing a structure for anti-displacement is the most important, right, to all of this. And so the Minneapolis group was really thinking about that. Ensuring that there are sufficient resources to support policy implementation, organizing efforts, community development and ownership, and other anti-displacement strategies. While this point is very similar to the one in Crystal Robbinsdale, I think there was some nuance to the Minneapolis conversation in this question as well too. One of the programs that I referenced, I think in the BAC group was, it's not the first time that we've tried to prevent folks from leaving because of significant public investment. I think the NRP program, which really developed the structure for neighborhood associations in the 1990s in Minneapolis, is another really good example of doing this, perhaps for a different reason, but it developed a long-term structure of community participation and agency in significant conversations about their communities. I think it's not just about addressing this issue of participation for the Blue Line Extension project, but it's about developing the next iteration of a long-term structure for community participation and capacity around these projects. And of course, similar, there is the supporting Minneapolis and others to be able to implement these policies at their highest level and supporting that in a variety of different ways. We'll get into a bit more into that conversation around resourcing anti-displacement as well too. Ensuring that there's access to land, housing, and businesses in the corridor throughout all phases of construction. We had a large conversation around workforce in Minneapolis, ensuring that 50% of the jobs from the Bottineau Light Rail development are held by North Minneapolis residents. This was a distinct point that came out that this line should not just be built by folks outside of the community, but should be built by the community itself too. And again, that's thinking about the long-term structure of success for North Minneapolis in particular, is making sure we're building a workforce that can not just participate in this project, but other projects as well too. Ensuring that there's a continued role for anti-displacement working group members throughout all phases of the project. So I went through a lot of outcomes, and these are outcomes which, again, just to remind folks, is the North Star for what anti-displacement is purported to achieve if we lived into this vision. These are supported by, what I'm about to jump into, the policies that sort of came into the frame from this group. So these are the outcomes that we get to. The policies themselves are meant to get us to these outcomes. So just as a reminder, early in the presentation, I said we looked at 55 different policies over the course of our time together in the anti-displacement working group. We did a literature review around the country about anti-displacement approaches. We also did a survey within each government about what they are already doing to address anti-displacement. And that's really what helped us get us to 55. And then over time in the conversation, both with governments, with the anti-displacement working group, our research in community, our engagement with community around this project, I think is how we got to these 17. Again, what I want to remind folks is those outcomes are really what we're trying to get to. There's more than just these 17 ways to get us to those outcomes. So if we agree on the outcomes, it's not just these 17 policies I think that we can have a conversation about. The report goes into more detail about that. What I'll also say is a number of these policies already exist. For example, every government has a land disposition policy, right? The policy that says we have a piece of land. How are we going to return that land to an entity that's not their own? But I think Kathy has a really good line about while some of these policies already exist, a lot of them or nearly all of them need to be reframed in the context of anti-displacement in some way. So they may already exist, right? For example, there may be small business grants or small business support, but it may not meet the context of displacement that would occur on the Blue Line extension as a result of light rail. And so Kathy has a good line about saying, how do we make those policies blue or make them within the frame of the Blue Line extension? Then, of course, there are a number of these policies that don't exist. And there, of course, what I'll say about each of these policies, there's many different manifestations of them. For example, rent stabilization or rent control. There's no two cities alike that have the same rent control policy. So again, it's about defining these policies in a way that speaks towards displacement within the specific corridor, not in all the contexts that they could possibly exist, right? It's about refining them for this particular context. Another thing that I'll say is, without going into each of these 17 policies, because that would probably be another 2-hour meeting, but the report itself does detail these policies. I think you can probably imagine 30 different general scenarios in which someone would be displaced. For example, I am a business owner who rents my building, and I'm worried about my property owner selling the property that I'm in, and then I'll have to move, right? And in that, I can see sort of the way that these policies might work together to achieve addressing that situation. For example, that business owner might really value mandatory relocation assistance. I need to move during this time. I should be compensated to do that, right? And that might be the case for a business that's or a property that's acquired because of the project itself. Tenant opportunity to purchase, which is sort of the policy that says that tenant should have the first right to purchase that property in the first place. A 0 to low interest loan might be the capital for that business owner to achieve that. Right to return might mean if you're relocated out of the project area because of project impacts, right to return gives them the legal right to be the first to return when a space opens up in that place, right? These policies are often meant to exist together, caring for probably 30 different general scenarios that might exist in this corridor. I'm happy to go in more detail should the committee want to talk about in more detail. But our report details about how these policies exist within an anti-displacement frame particularly. Right? It gives you a sense of when should this policy be implemented. It gives a general sense of who should be the implementing body. Some of them might be the cities themselves. Some of them might be the county. Some of them might be state. And thinking through and strategizing about what's the right place to implement these things, I think is a distinct part of this. So there's really a lot of complexity to this, and we could go into it as much as your questions ask for it, but I didn't want to necessarily present 17 different unique policies themselves. So, okay.
What will it take for implementation? Well, a lot of partnership. I'll jump in here. Coordination, collaboration, and commitment. So really bringing everybody to the table that really wants to be there and help with this effort. This is a big lift. It's hard work. And so coming together in a cooperative, collective way, I think is the best way to accomplish these things in a very meaningful way. And the investment and partnership that we'll need will come from the gamut, public, private, philanthropic, and community organizations. Bringing all those folks to the table, I think, is how we accomplish great things as well. So we'll be asking for, inviting people to the conversation and seeing what the will and the desire is. And obviously, we want a transparency and shared decision-making with our community members. I mean, that's the only way that they're going to feel like they're a part of the process and that we're here listening and trying to achieve the outcomes that are desired.
So just thinking through transitioning to implementation, a big thing, of course, is communicating these recommendations in this report generally. I think someone said we have a very complicated report, which I get, it's academic, it's supposed to speak to many different audiences. But we're also going to develop communication materials that are more appropriate to be on the street with. Helping folks see, does this report address their particular concerns from their own perspective? So we have a plan to develop some, they're in development right now, those materials, and I expect to spend nearly my whole summer on the block throughout this corridor and in various places communicating this work. But it's not just communicating, it's about engaging communities and developing an implementation plan itself to be able to prioritize and strategize when these policies are best to be implemented. Again, there's many different forms of each of these policies. Some are very general, some are very particular, but of course they need to live in the real experience of folks of what they're experiencing along the corridor as a result of this light rail line. And so part of it is, there's a plan to make sure that this work is communicating to other parts of the project. For example, any of these recommendations that end up as mitigation strategies within the supplemental draft environmental impact statement would be then funded by this project, right? They'd be guaranteed within this project, right? So there's sort of a really high and concrete value to making connections to the other parts of the project. But of course, other of them don't connect to the project as much, but they say, again, might be required to be implemented at the state level. And so thinking through how do we get to a 2024 policy agenda that goes to the state legislature that makes sense. But otherwise, it's really about developing the structure for implementation, which again is still a structure for conversation, not just between community, but of course between governments themselves, philanthropy, and other entities that are a part of delivering these recommendations. Not all of them are envisioned to be implemented solely by government, right? There's a really high value for community to have a large level of agency in delivering these recommendations, but we still need to continue to sit at the same table in order to sort of make sense of all that together. So bringing those implementation partners together, part of the recommendations is the formation of a group that receive these recommendations, not both at a sort of a corridor level, but within each of the governments themselves too. Again, they're unique to the context in which they're present or recommended in. Sorry, I know I'm saying a lot. There's a lot to really communicate.
So we have posted on yourblueline.org/anti-displacement, a community-centered website for feedback. The report is there. All of the workshop materials, even a video stream of the workshops themselves is at this place. We also have some interactive ways that community can provide feedback and input into the report, in addition to questions, just referring to a spot within the report to ask a question. Also, there's a survey attached there if people so choose to provide their feedback in that way. There's a news feed there that highlights Hennepin County May 2nd board briefing, where we provided kind of an overview of the anti-displacement work. And there you can see the support for this work from our commissioners.
Kathy C. Terrence, thank you. We've been waiting for this day, and we've been anticipating this day, and now I see more than ever that this is the beginning, not the end, and very exciting, and I appreciate this great work and really appreciate the work of the committee. I want to acknowledge Mayor Minneapolis, Mayor Fry, thank you for being here today. You came just on cue when we started talking about Minneapolis. But also, before we open it up, but we just have a little bit of time, I just want to first kind of see if we have any comments from the BAC. We heard earlier from the CAC, but Dr. Tara Watson, Dan, Dorr, do you have any kind of quick comments you'd like to give from your past meetings? And then we'll have a chance to open it up and get the kind of a start of some conversation here.
Yes, I'll give the first comment, and we did provide that comment and feedback at the BAC meeting, and so you've heard it. So I'll provide the same comment that we provided for Cura about the anti-displacement work. We felt it was a really needed document, but it was a robust document. We requested that it be a more digestible document for the public. it's very needed, but we thought that in its first form that this is what was necessary because it needed, all of the information needed to be there, but as it went through its phases, it needed to be a document for the public so that they could understand it, so that it could be used so in a form that a suggestion that came up would be kind of that navigator concept. So when coming to individuals or business owners, so almost like a project manager. So a navigator would be assigned to a business, and when used, that project manager or navigator would be assigned to a business, and they would work with that document with the business, and it would kind of be an intake and an interview, and they would work through that document, getting kind of in it, going through and assessing that business with what their needs were, working with that document through the document, and using that document to get the business the resources that they needed. Because again, businesses don't know what they need and wouldn't be able to work through that document and understand that document. And so, and wouldn't be able to, the complexity of that document, they wouldn't be able to use and get the benefits of the document. And so that was kind of what came out of the meeting. And then in terms of the feedback from our last meeting, what we're getting from the meetings and the convening that's kind of going around, the process continues to roll forward, even though the communities are pushing back. We have requested time and again for the process to be slowed down, to reexamine all the routes. They don't want it. They're not supporting the project. Community organizations, grassroots organizations, business organizations. The momentum seems to continue to be gaining. The work continues, and they're just requesting, just to slow down so that people can understand what's really going on. And, they just don't seem to be heard. And the work continues, the momentum continues. And so how do you get a sense of trust when things continue to happen and people just are just, I don't know where to begin, and I don't know how to begin to explain things to people. The meetings continue, we continue to gather information, people are going door to door, people are gathering information, people are listening, people are hearing, people are, there's presentations going on, there are PowerPoints going on, there are websites going up. There's all kinds of information out there. People don't even understand where the information is going. People there's all sorts of things out there, and there's momentum, and there's movement, and stuff is happening. And so I just don't know how you begin to even get people's trust, and they don't see the slowdown. So it's hard to get the trust of your city, and you're still moving, and there's promises.
Very well said.
Anything to add?
I guess one question, see, Terrence, you made reference to some of the people at that BAC meeting who were part of a group that you had worked with. I was impressed by some of that positive reaction and kind of a testimonial from that group about how they felt that this was well done. I want to make sure that we leave a little time for folks to comment from,
Yeah.
I think you mean.
Was that the intent?
Well, it looks like Terry and Amanda, who are work group members here, we'll just kind of turn to you two right now.
Well, I'll be very quick here. My name is Terry Austin, and I was a part of this anti-displacement work group. I will tell you this, it was a very robust, very well thought out. I thought Terrence did a great job. And when you come to a table of dealing with an investment this big, there's so many stakeholders at the table, and there's so many folks with different interests at the table as well. And we tried to go through every aspect of what this would look like, regardless of the route. So I want to tell you this was very, very, very well thought out. And then secondly, I want to apologize to the council for any. I went to a meeting maybe a month ago or a month and a half ago, and I work for NEON, Northside Economic Opportunity Network, and I'm part of their engagement team. And I went to this meeting to listen, to learn, and to engage with the citizens in Lynn Park. And so that was the purpose of me being there. How my name got in a crossfire of me being part of the Met Council, I don't know. But I was there to listen to the citizens there and to also to let them know that in order for us to gain trust in this community, we have to stay engaged. And I was just encouraging the folks at the table to stay engaged and keep meeting, because this is the time that we need to meet and bring all of your suggestions to the table. And that was the only reason that I was there. And I want to continue to encourage the citizens in North Minneapolis and the broader suburbs to stay engaged. That's the only way that you're going to build trust and to get the results that you're looking for.
Thank you.
Well, hello, everyone. My name is Amanda. I'm sorry if I speak slow. That was a lot of information. I'm trying to catch up. But my name is Amanda. I am a part of the ADWG as well as the BLC, Blue Line Coalition. And I reside in Brooklyn Park. I was born and raised there. And I don't do this work because I get paid or anything. I literally just do it because I have high hopes for community members and ensuring that their voices are being heard and that the people who are sitting in seats like right here are actually listening to them. And so with my time with the ADWG, if you were to attend one of the meetings, you guys could clearly see the diversity in it. And you guys could see clearly right there that that's the community that lives within the corridor. You could see that, you had the small business owners there, you had youth, there was people from, people who sit in seats like you guys is there, and everybody just kind of joining together in conversation, trying to resolve this issue that impacts community, which is displacement. And I'll even be honest, I don't use transit. I've never even been on the Blue Line or the Green Line because I have the luxury of owning a 2020 Acura, right? But then notice that not everybody has that luxury, and so people rely on transit. Also realize that not everybody has accessible housing or enough money for rent. Not too long ago, there was a whole sweep throughout cities of cutting down diseased trees, and just chopping down one tree could impact whether or not that person was going to be homeless or not the next month. And so realize that housing is a basic need. It shouldn't be a luxury. And I've heard testimonies from folks who use the Green Line who are now afraid to go on transit again because we have people who have been displaced because of the Green Line extension calling the Green Line their home because they literally live within the train. And so we want to ensure that when we are doing this sort of work, that there's a purpose, there's a goal, and that we actually achieve that goal. And so today we're all here basically to really see whether or not we're going to be adopting this policy or these policies that have been recommended. But I'll be honest, my main curiosity is if we don't adopt it, then what was the point? What was the point in all of us working together to form ADWG? What was the point of us doing constant community engagement to hear what our neighbors are wanting? And on top of that too, it was just kind of what was the point of us even trying? And so that's the reason why I'm here, is because I have hope that, again, whatever is said would be listened to, because everything that community wants is based upon these policies. We've done the work. Everybody in that room was community, and we are saying, what we want are these policies. And so we're coming to you guys now to really communicate that over to you guys. And, being 21 years old, I've only been doing this for a year or two. That's what I want. I want to see my community be able to flourish, but at the same time, stay the same. You know, I don't want much drastic changes, and I don't want to one day wake up in the neighborhood that I was born and raised in and see people that don't look like me and don't understand my culture or who I really am. And so just want to put that out there. Really ask yourselves when deciding today, if you were to decide against, then what was the point of all of us coming together to really work on these policies? I mean, I'm not trying to pressure y'all, but at the same time, pressure, because it's not like I'm getting paid to do this. I spent my Saturdays with these people. Not that they're bad, but really, honestly.
Well, Amanda, Terry, and everybody's involved in the work group. See, Terrence, remarkable. This is so much information, and part of it is absorbing, part of it is finding the very lanes of implementation accountability. There's work to be done, as Terrence has said, put forth the framework of implementation. It will help give Amanda that question, like, where does this land, and was it worth it? We don't have, we're just coming to the end, but we have a time for just a few comments, and I know
Yes.
Commissioner Fernando.
I know we're
I'm
at time.
looking to you.
Yes, I know we're at time. Of course, thank you. We're not voting on this today, but I certainly hear what you just stated. There's a public comment period. This is coming back to us. The thing that I'll state is some of these recommendations seem innovative or aspirational because they are in the context of government. And what we're hearing from community members is they're not aspirational when we think of the regular lived realities of our residents and neighbors. And so I think that's part of the call to action that I think we're hearing. And I don't know how many comments we're gonna have, so I just wanted to state that we hear that. I am receiving that also. Hennepin staff that are here are receiving that. And innovative against government is different than innovative when these are the lived realities and necessities of our neighbors. So thank you for your work.
Thank you for that comment. We have a.
Cheers,
Please, go ahead.
I gotta rush out of here, but I'm gonna have to do this before I leave. So I was not under the impression there was gonna be a comment period, a public comment period. I was under the impression we came here today to vote on adopting the policy. So I would like to move a motion for us to, accept the policy that as it is, as the community has spoke and said this, they support it. They worked blood, sweat, and tears on doing it. It's been presented to us, and I would like to move a motion for it to be adopted as is today.
And just to clarify, we aren't actually here to take an action, and I hear your motion, but in fairness of all this comment and the additional comments to be absorbed, and of course the question is, who's accepting? How do we adopt to kind of drill deeper into that question? So I want to be respectful of the intention, but also to clarify kind of the role of where we are now with 3 minutes left to be beginning this process of implementation and to bring forth these recommendations. They're not recommendations necessarily to this body. They're recommendations to a number of different government and not all government entities. So that's we're kind of in a process, but that's my sense. Reva, would you like?
Well, yeah,
Sorry to interrupt you, Councilmember Reba Chambliss, Chair. My motion still stands.
Yeah, I heard it.
Okay.
Thank you. Reva?
thank you, Chair. And I'm glad that, the first thing that you said was that we were waiting for this presentation. We've been waiting for over 4 years. I know I personally have, and how we plan to address anti-displacement, which is much bigger than anti-displacement. It's making sure that, as has been said, our community benefits. Okay, our community receives the investments. And so the policy recommendations that were presented today, along with your recommendation to assign strategies for implementation, I think is a very strong approach. None of this will happen without funding and investments. And it was listed. Those are public investments, private investments, foundations, and community organizations. And in order to have a strong impact on behalf of the communities along the corridor, those investments need to be substantial in order to have a substantial impact. So that's what I would like to see in terms of outcomes. And I'm glad that you will be working to facilitate that work along with the community partners that have been involved up to this point.
We are at time, 3 o'clock, and I would just want to again appreciate all the efforts of the committee and certainly the work group. As I mentioned, this is the beginning. We have many questions, including some of the calls for action that we've just heard today. So with that, we, as they say, need the room, but appreciate it. June 8th, we will have a very important meeting. We'll be focusing on Minneapolis, but the work on this anti-displacement continues.
Could I ask a quick question? Because I just feel like it's important that we understand when are we gonna vote in the recommendations that the report has set forward? Because community showed up today with the hopes that you would at least adopt the plan to create the body in order for us to be able to tell community that this is moving forward. So
I truly appreciate that. I'll tell you what, we'll get back to tell you where and how and what lanes there would be for adoption. And with that, this meeting's adjourned.